The wind screamed through the forest like a living thing, tearing at Maris's cloak and stealing the breath from her lungs. Snow bit into her cheeks with every step. Her boots slipped on ice hidden beneath fresh powder. She stumbled, caught herself against a tree, pushed forward again. Behind her, shouts cut through the storm. They were still coming. Her heart hammered against her ribs, so loud she thought the whole world must hear it. 3 days she'd been running. 3 days since she'd watched them burn her family's cottage to ash. Since she'd hidden in the root cellar and listened to her grandmother's screams go silent. The memory made her legs weak, but fear kept them moving. A branch cracked somewhere to her left. Too close. She veered right, deeper into the trees where the snow fell thick enough to hide her tracks. Her lungs burned, her legs trembled with exhaustion. She'd eaten nothing but handfuls of snow since dawn. Another shout, closer now. Male voices calling to each other in the language of hired killers. They'd found her trail again. If stories like this touch your heart, please subscribe so you never miss another one. Maris's foot caught on a buried root. She went down hard, face first into snow that swallowed her cry. Cold shocked through her body. For a moment, she couldn't move, couldn't think, could only feel the storm pressing down on her like a burial shroud. Get up or die here. She pushed herself to her knees, then to her feet. Her vision swam. The world tilted, trees spinning in circles around her. She'd lost too much blood from the arrow graze along her ribs, lost too much warmth. Her body was shutting down piece by piece. 20 more steps, and she fell again. This time she couldn't rise. The snow felt almost warm now, soft, like the feather bed she'd slept in as a child, before everything had been taken away, before she'd learned what it meant to be hunted. She closed her eyes and thought maybe it wouldn't be so terrible to rest. Just for a moment. Just long enough to catch her breath. Footsteps crunched through snow behind her. Found her, a rough voice called. She's down. Maris tried to move. Her body wouldn't obey. She managed to roll onto her side, one hand scrabbling uselessly at the snow. No weapon, no strength left. Nothing but the wild, desperate need to survive that had kept her alive this long. An arrow thudded into the tree above her head. "Finish it," another voice said. "We don't get paid if she makes it to dawn." She heard a bowstring creak, heard her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, each pulse a drumbeat counting down her final seconds. She thought of her grandmother, of the life she'd never have, of all the things left undone. A new sound cut through the storm. Hoofbeats, heavy and fast, coming from the north. The arrow never flew. Instead, she heard cursing, heard the assassins scrambling. One of them shouted a warning she couldn't make out through the roaring in her head. Then a deeper sound. A growl that resonated in her chest and spoke to something ancient in her blood. Alpha. The word rose unbidden in her mind. Not just any alpha, but something more. Something that made her wolf whimper and press close, even as her human mind screamed warnings. She forced her eyes open. Through the curtain of falling snow, she saw him, a massive figure on a black horse, moving through the storm like it was nothing. Moonlight caught the edge of a blade. One of the assassins went down without a sound. The other ran. The horse wheeled, and she lost sight of them both in the swirling white. Silence fell, broken only by the wind. The rider turned toward her. She couldn't see his face, just the dark shape of him against the pale snow. He dismounted in one smooth motion and crossed the distance between them. Up close he seemed even larger, broad-shouldered and solid, smelling of leather and pine and something wild that made her wolf stir despite her exhaustion. "Easy," he said. His voice was low, carefully gentle. "You're safe now," she tried to speak, managed only a broken sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Safe, as if such a thing existed for her anymore. He crouched beside her, and she finally saw his face. Strong features, hard lines softened by concern, dark eyes that caught what little light filtered through the trees. A scar traced his jaw on one side. He studied her with an intensity that should have frightened her, but somehow didn't. "Can you stand?" he asked. She shook her head, tried again to move, and failed. He glanced back the way he'd come, tension in every line of his body, listening. After a moment, he looked down at her again, and something in his expression shifted. Decision made. "I'm going to lift you," he said. "Try not to fight me." Before she could respond, he slid one arm beneath her shoulders, the other under her knees. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. She was too weak to fight, too cold to care about propriety or danger. She let her head fall against his chest and felt his heartbeat, strong and steady, a counterpoint to her own frantic pulse. He carried her to his horse and somehow got them both mounted, settling her across his lap with her back against his chest. The horse started forward at his quiet command. She felt his arm tight around her waist, holding her secure, felt the warmth of him soaking through her frozen clothes. "Hold on," he said into her hair. "It's not far." She wanted to ask where, wanted to demand answers, to know who he was and why he'd saved her. But the words wouldn't come. The world was fading at the edges again, darkness creeping in despite her best efforts to stay conscious. An arrow hissed past them, close enough that she felt the wind of its passing. The alpha, she didn't even know his name, shifted his grip on her and urged the horse faster. They plunged deeper into the forest, the storm swallowing them whole. More shouts behind them, further away now. He guided the horse with practiced ease, navigating terrain she couldn't even see. She felt when they passed through some invisible boundary. The air changed, grew somehow thicker, pressing against her skin like a warning. Pack lands. The thought floated through her fading consciousness. She'd crossed into someone's territory. Into his territory. The horse slowed. She heard the creak of a door, smelled smoke and wood. Shelter. He dismounted and pulled her down after him, carrying her through a doorway into warmth that made her gasp. A fire burned in a stone hearth. Simple furniture, rough-hewn but sturdy. A hunting cabin, far from any pack house. He laid her on a bed covered in thick furs. She tried to hold on to consciousness, tried to see where he was going as he moved away. But the warmth was too much after so much cold. The softness beneath her, too, inviting after days of frozen ground. "Sleep," he said from somewhere nearby. "I'll keep watch." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she couldn't trust anyone, not even a rescuer. Wanted to ask what price he'd demand for her life. But exhaustion won. Her eyes closed. The last thing she felt was something warm settling over her. A blanket, or maybe his cloak. The last thing she heard was his voice, too soft to make out the words, but the tone unmistakable. A promise. The darkness took her then, and for the first time in 3 days, she stopped running. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside, wrapped in warmth and the strange safety of a stranger's protection, Maris finally surrendered to the oblivion she'd been fighting. Her last conscious thought was of his eyes, dark and steady, and in them, something that looked almost like recognition, as if he'd been waiting for her all along. Maris woke to firelight and the smell of herbs. Her body ached in 1,000 places, each bruise and scrape announcing itself as she tried to move. The bed beneath her was soft, the furs piled over her heavy and warm. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then it came back in fragments. The storm. The assassins. The stranger on the black horse. She opened her eyes and found him watching her from across the room. He sat in a chair near the hearth, firelight casting shadows across features that looked harder in the dim light. Still handsome, in a rough way that spoke of violence survived and wars won. His dark hair fell past his collar, damp at the ends. He'd changed clothes, she realized. Traded snow-soaked leather for a simple shirt and wool trousers. When he saw she was awake, he rose and crossed to her in 3 long strides. "Don't try to sit up yet," he said. His voice was gentler than she expected. "You've been out for hours?" She ignored him and pushed herself upright anyway. Pain lanced through her side and she gasped, one hand going to her ribs. He reached out as if to steady her, then checked the motion and let his hand fall. "Stubborn," he said. Almost a smile touched his mouth. "I should have guessed." Her ribs were bound tight beneath a clean shirt that wasn't hers. She looked down at herself and felt heat rise in her cheeks. Someone had undressed her, tended her wounds. She knew it must have been him, but the thought made something twist in her chest. "You were freezing," he said, reading her expression, "and bleeding. I did what was necessary, nothing more." She met his eyes and found no deception there, just steady calm and something that might have been concern. She didn't know what to do with that. Didn't know how to respond to kindness when she'd been running from cruelty for so long. "Who are you?" Her voice came out rough, barely more than a whisper. Her throat was raw from screaming into the storm. He moved back to the chair and settled into it, giving her space. "My name is Kieran," he said. "This is my cabin, my territory, and you're safe here." Kieran. She tested the name silently and found it suited him. Strong, straightforward, nothing hidden in the syllables. "The men chasing you," he said. "Who were they?" She looked away, toward the fire. "Assassins, hired killers." Each word cost her. "They came 3 days ago. Burned my home, killed my grandmother." Her throat closed around the rest of it. Silence stretched between them. When she looked back, he was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Anger, maybe. Or grief that matched her own. "I'm sorry," he said. Simple words, but they carried weight. As if he understood what it meant to lose everything. She pulled the furs tighter around herself. "Why did you save me?" He tilted his head slightly, considering. "I heard your heartbeat," he said. "Through the storm. No one should have been able to hear anything in that wind, but..." He paused. "I heard you. And I couldn't leave you to die." Something in his tone made her wolf stir. A recognition she didn't understand. She pushed it down, forced herself to focus. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing." He said it without hesitation. "When you're strong enough, you can go wherever you need to. I won't hold you here." She searched his face for the lie. Found none. But years of running had taught her that promises meant nothing. That kindness always came with a price. "I don't have anything to give you," she said. "No coin, no trade, nothing." "I didn't ask for payment." There was a hint of something sharp in his voice now, not anger, but frustration maybe, as if her distrust wounded him. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm hadn't passed yet. She could hear wind battering the cabin walls, snow hissing against the shuttered windows. Even if she wanted to run, she couldn't. Not in this weather. Not with her body this broken. She was trapped. The realization settled over her like a weight. Kieran rose and moved to the hearth. He ladled something from a pot hanging over the fire into a wooden bowl. Steam rose from it, carrying the scent of meat and vegetables. Her stomach clenched with sudden, desperate hunger. He brought the bowl to her and set it on the small table beside the bed, along with a spoon. "Eat," he said. "You need strength." She stared at the food and felt tears prick her eyes. 3 days since she'd eaten anything hot. 3 days of cold and fear and running. Her hands shook as she reached for the spoon. The first bite nearly undid her. Rich broth, tender meat, soft carrots. Flavor exploded across her tongue, and she couldn't stop the small sound that escaped her throat. She ate quickly, barely tasting it after that first bite, driven by need more than pleasure. When the bowl was empty, she set it aside and found him watching her again. This time his expression was softer, satisfied, as if her eating had pleased him somehow. "There's more if you want it," he said. She shook her head. Her stomach was already protesting the sudden fullness after days of nothing. "I should go," she said. Even as the words left her mouth, she knew how foolish they sounded. "When the storm breaks, I need to keep moving." "They'll still be out there," Kieran said quietly, "hunting you." "I know." She lifted her chin. "I've been running for 3 days. I can keep running. Until they catch you." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Or until you collapse again, and there's no one to pull you from the snow." His eyes held hers. "What did you do to earn that kind of attention? Assassins don't come cheap." She looked away. "I existed," she said. "That was my crime." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler. "I lost my family too," he said. 5 years ago, fever took them all in the span of a month. My father, my mother, my younger brother." He paused. "I know what it is to be alone." The grief in his voice was real, raw despite the years that had passed. She found herself looking at him differently, seeing past the strength to the pain beneath. A man who understood loss, who knew what it cost to survive when everyone you loved was gone. "I'm sorry," she said, the same words he'd offered her, and just as inadequate. He nodded once, accepting. "The point is, I understand what it means to need sanctuary. To need time to heal and figure out what comes next." He gestured at the cabin around them. "This place is hidden, protected. The storm will last at least another day. Stay that long, rest, recover. Then if you still want to leave, I'll help you." "Why?" The question burst from her. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." His gaze held hers, dark and steady and impossible to look away from. "Because you needed help," he said. "And because—" He trailed off, something flickering across his face. Uncertainty, maybe. Or recognition he didn't know how to name. "Because I think you're supposed to be here." The words settled between them like a vow. Outside, the wind howled and snow continued to fall. But inside the cabin, with firelight dancing across rough walls and warmth seeping into her frozen bones, Maris felt something she hadn't felt in 3 days. Hope. It was fragile. Dangerous. Hope had a way of being crushed. But sitting there in a stranger's bed, wearing a stranger's shirt, fed by a stranger's hand, she couldn't quite kill it. "One day," she said finally. "I'll stay one day." Kieran's shoulders relaxed slightly, as if he'd been holding tension she hadn't noticed. "One day," he agreed. "And we'll see what happens after that." He rose and moved back to his chair, giving her space again. The fire crackled between them. Snow tapped against the windows. And slowly, carefully, Maris let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could stop running. At least for tonight. Maris woke to pale gray light filtering through the shutters and the smell of something cooking. For a moment she lay still, disoriented by the softness beneath her and the absence of fear. Then memory returned, and with it the knowledge that she was still in Kieran's cabin, still hidden from the world that wanted her dead. She sat up slowly, testing her body. The worst of the fever had broken during the night. Her ribs still ached where the arrow had grazed them, but the sharp edge of pain had dulled to something manageable. She felt weak, wrung out, but no longer on the edge of collapse. Kieran stood at the hearth with his back to her, tending something in a pan. He'd rolled his sleeves to his elbows, and she found herself studying the lines of his forearms, the easy competence in his movements. He moved like someone accustomed to taking care of himself, to being alone. He must have heard her shift because he glanced over his shoulder. "You're awake," he said. "How do you feel?" "Better." She pushed the furs aside and swung her legs over the edge of the bed. The floor was cold beneath her bare feet. "Thank you. For last night. For all of it." He turned back to the pan. "You don't need to thank me." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. After a moment she stood, testing her balance. The room swayed slightly, but steadied. She crossed to the small window and peered through a gap in the shutters. Snow still fell, though not as heavily as before. The world beyond the glass was white and silent, trees bent under the weight of ice. Beautiful and deadly in equal measure. "The storm should break by evening," Kieran said behind her, "but the passes won't be safe for days. Not with the drifts this deep." She heard what he wasn't saying. Even if she wanted to leave, she couldn't. Not yet. The thought should have frightened her, but all she felt was a strange relief. One more day of rest. One more day before she had to decide what came next. "Are you hungry?" he asked. She was. Ravenous, actually, now that the fever had passed. She nodded and moved to the rough-hewn table near the hearth. He brought 2 plates and set one in front of her. Eggs and some kind of cured meat. Bread toasted over the fire. Simple food, but it smelled like heaven. They ate in silence for a while. She was too focused on the meal to make conversation, and he seemed content to let her eat in peace. When she'd cleaned her plate, he rose and brought her more bread, setting it down without a word. She looked up at him, this strange alpha who'd pulled her from the snow and asked nothing in return. In daylight, she could see him more clearly. The strong line of his jaw, the slight crook in his nose that suggested it had been broken at least once, the scar that traced from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone. A warrior's face, but his eyes were kind. "You said you lost your family," she said. 5 years ago." He settled back into his chair across from her. "Yes." "And you've been alone since then?" "Mostly." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "I'm the alpha here. My pack is small, scattered across the territory. Most of them have families of their own. They don't need me hovering over them every day. So you come here," she said, "to the cabin. When I need quiet." He met her eyes. "When I need to remember who I was before I had to be strong for everyone else." The honesty in his words struck something in her chest. She knew about masks. About the face you showed the world versus the truth you kept hidden. For 3 years she'd been no one. A ghost moving from place to place, never staying long enough for anyone to ask questions. "My grandmother raised me," she heard herself say. "After my parents died. She taught me to survive, to stay hidden, to trust no one." She looked down at her hands. "She was the only family I had left. How did they find you?" His voice was gentle, but the question still hurt. "I don't know." She forced herself to meet his gaze. "We were careful. We never stayed anywhere too long, never used our real names. But someone must have recognized me. Sent word to—" She trailed off, old fear tightening her throat. "To whoever wants you dead." He said it matter-of-factly, no judgment in his tone. "Do you know why?" She hesitated. The truth sat heavy on her tongue, dangerous as poison. If she told him who she really was, what she represented, he might change his mind about helping her, might decide she was too much trouble, too great a risk. But looking at him now, at the steadiness in his dark eyes, she found she was tired of lying. "My bloodline," she said quietly. "I'm the last of a family that some people would prefer stayed dead." He studied her for a long moment. "Royalty?" he asked. She jerked back, startled. "How did you— the way you speak, the way you move, even injured?" He leaned back in his chair. "I've met enough nobles to recognize the training. You were raised for something more than hiding in root cellars." Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment he'd throw her out, or worse, turn her over to whoever was hunting her for the reward that must be on her head. But Kieran just nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. "It doesn't change anything," he said. "You're still welcome here, as long as you need." "You don't understand." She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "If they find me here, they'll kill you too. They'll burn this place to the ground. They'll destroy your pack. Let them try." There was steel in his voice now, the alpha rising to the surface. "This is my territory, my land. No one comes here without my permission." "They won't care about permission." She wrapped her arms around herself. "They'll come with fire and steel, and they won't stop until I'm dead." He rose and crossed to her in 2 strides. For a moment she thought he might reach for her, but he stopped just short of touching, his presence warm and steady in the cold cabin. "Listen to me," he said. "I've faced down rogues in rival packs. I've fought battles you can't imagine. I'm not afraid of hired killers." His eyes held hers. "And I'm not going to let anyone take you." The certainty in his words made something crack in her chest. No one had stood for her since her grandmother died. No one had looked at her and seen someone worth protecting rather than a problem to be solved. "Why?" The question came out barely a whisper. "You don't even know me." "Maybe not." He was so close now she could feel the heat radiating from him, could smell pine and wood smoke, and something uniquely him. "But I know what it means to be hunted, to feel like the world has turned against you. And I know what it's like to wish someone had been there when you needed them most." Her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. "I can't repay you for this." "I don't want repayment." His voice softened. "I want you to be safe. That's all." She looked up at him and saw only truth in his expression. No hidden agenda, no calculation. Just a man who'd found someone in need and refused to turn away. "One more day," she said. "Then I'll figure out where to go, what to do next." One day at a time, he agreed. He stepped back, giving her space again. The loss of his warmth made her shiver, though the cabin was still heated by the fire. She watched as he moved to the hearth and added another log, watched the easy strength in his movements, the careful control. An alpha, she reminded herself, powerful and dangerous and bound by instincts she didn't fully understand. He'd been kind so far, But that didn't mean she could trust him completely. Didn't mean she could let her guard down. But when he turned back to her and offered a small smile, something in her chest loosened anyway. "There's tea if you want it," he said. "And I should probably check your bandages, make sure the wound is healing properly." She nodded and sat back down at the table. He brought her a mug of something that smelled of herbs and honey, then moved behind her. She stiffened as his hands touched the hem of the borrowed shirt, but he was careful, clinical, his touch gentle as he unwrapped the binding at her ribs. "It looks good," he said after a moment. "Clean, no infection, you heal fast." "My grandmother's teaching." She kept her voice steady. "She knew every herb, every remedy. Made sure I learned them all." His hands stilled. "She sounds like she was remarkable." She was. The grief rose swift and sharp. "She deserved better than to die protecting me. She died, protecting what she loved most." Kieran's voice was low, close to her ear. "There's no better death than that." He finished rewrapping her ribs and stepped away. She pulled the shirt back down and took a sip of the tea, grateful for something to do with her shaking hands. Outside, the wind had picked up again, rattling the shutters. The storm wasn't done with them yet. She thought of the assassins out there somewhere, waiting for their chance. Thought of the long miles between her and any kind of real safety. One day at a time, Kieran had said. She'd survived 3 days of hell. She could survive one more day of this strange, fragile peace. She looked across the table and found him watching her again, that same intensity in his dark eyes, as if he was trying to memorize her face, as if he knew, somehow, that whatever was building between them in this small cabin wouldn't last. Couldn't last. "Tell me about your pack," she said, needing to break the silence. "About this place." He settled back into his chair, cradling his own mug. "It's a small territory. Mostly forest, some farmland to the south. Good people, for the most part. They keep to themselves, work hard, don't ask for trouble. And you take care of them. I try." He looked into the fire. "It's what my father taught me. That power isn't about ruling, it's about serving. About making sure your people are safe and fed and have what they need to thrive." She heard the weight in his words, the loneliness. "It's hard," she said softly. "Being responsible for everyone." "Yes," he glanced at her, "but someone has to do it." The afternoon stretched on, quiet and slow. They spoke in fits and starts, sharing small pieces of themselves. He told her about learning to hunt from his father, about the first time he'd shifted and how terrifying and exhilarating it had been. She told him about her grandmother's garden, about learning to read the stars for navigation, about the places she'd lived before everything fell apart. She didn't tell him her real name, didn't speak of the palace or the throne that should have been hers. Some truths were still too dangerous to voice. But as the light faded and evening crept across the snow-covered land, as Kieran lit candles and built up the fire again, Maris felt something she hadn't expected. Peace. Just for a moment. Just for one stolen day. But it was enough to make her think that maybe, somewhere in the world, safety still existed. Even if only in this small cabin, with this unexpected alpha who'd heard her heartbeat through a storm and refused to let her die alone in the snow. Maris woke in the deepest part of night to a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. Heat. Not the warmth of the fire or the furs piled over her. This came from inside, coiling low in her belly, spreading through her limbs like liquid fire. Her skin felt too tight, her breath came quick and shallow. Every nerve ending sang with a sensitivity that made even the soft fabric of her borrowed shirt feel like too much contact. No, not now. Not here. She'd thought she had more time, thought the stress and malnutrition of the past 3 days would have delayed it. But her body had its own calendar, and apparently safety and rest had triggered what fear and flight had postponed. She sat up slowly, trying to control her breathing. Across the room, Kieran slept in the chair by the dying fire, his head tipped back against the wood, one hand resting on the armrest. He'd insisted on keeping watch through the nights, refusing to take the bed. She'd argued at first, but he'd been immovable. Now she was grateful for the distance between them. The scent would reach him soon if it hadn't already. Omegas in Heat gave off a perfume that called to every alpha within range, impossible to ignore or resist. She had maybe minutes before he woke, maybe seconds. She needed to leave. Had to get out of the cabin before the heat fully took hold. Before she did something stupid like ask him for help with the ache building inside her. Before she ruined the fragile trust they'd built. She pushed the furs aside as quietly as she could and stood. Her legs trembled. The room spun slightly, but she forced herself to move toward the door. Her cloak hung on a peg nearby. She reached for it with shaking hands. "Don't." His voice cut through the darkness, rough with sleep and something else. Something that made her freeze with her fingers on the wool. She looked over her shoulder and found him watching her. He hadn't moved from the chair, but his eyes were open now, reflecting firelight. His jaw was tight. His hands gripped the armrests hard enough that she could see the tension in his forearms, even from across the room. "You can't go out there like this," he said. His voice was strained. "The storm hasn't passed. You'll die." "I can't stay here." Her own voice shook. "You know what's happening. You can smell it." Yes, the single word came out, almost a growl. "I can smell it." She turned to face him fully, keeping the table between them. "Then you know why I have to leave." "To what? Collapse in the snow and let the cold take you? Or maybe those assassins are still out there, waiting." An Omega in Heat would make for an easy target. He stood slowly, and she saw the careful control in every movement. "I'm not letting you walk out that door. You don't have a choice." She heard the panic creeping into her voice. "I won't. I can't ask you to. I'm not going to touch you." He said it firmly, like a vow. "Not while you're like this. Not without your clear consent given when you're in your right mind." She stared at him. "You're an alpha. I'm an Omega in Heat. You can't just ignore that." "Watch me." He moved to the hearth and added wood to the fire with deliberate motions, keeping his back to her. "I've had control of my instincts since I was 16 years old. I'm not about to lose it now." The heat pulsed through her again, stronger this time. She gripped the edge of the table and fought to keep her breathing steady. "How long does it usually last for you?" he asked without turning around. 2 days. She closed her eyes. "Maybe 3. Then we ride it out. You stay in the bed. I'll stay over here. We'll get through it." "Kieran?" She didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to explain that his very presence made it worse and better at the same time. That her Omega nature was screaming at her to go to him, to ask for his strength, his protection, his claim. That some part of her wanted to. "I know it's hard." His voice was gentler now. "I know every instinct you have is telling you to either run or not run. But you're safe here, with me. I swear I won't take advantage of this. I've never trusted an alpha before." The confession slipped out before she could stop it. "Not once. Not ever." He turned then, and the look in his eyes made her chest tighten. Understanding. Grief for what she'd endured. And underneath it all, something that looked like rage on her behalf. "What did they do to you?" he asked quietly. She wrapped her arms around herself. "Nothing. That's the point. I ran before anyone could. My grandmother made sure I knew what could happen to an unclaimed Omega. what alphas think they're entitled to. She met his gaze. She taught me to be afraid. She taught you to survive. He stayed where he was, making no move toward her. And she was right to be cautious. There are alphas out there who would see you as nothing more than a prize to be won, a vessel for their bloodline. Aren't they all like that? Bitterness crept into her voice. Isn't that what the bond is? Ownership? No. He said it with such conviction that she almost believed him. The bond is supposed to be partnership. Protection offered and accepted. Trust built over time, until neither can imagine existing without the other. He paused. My parents had that. I watched them every day of my childhood. My father would have died for my mother, and she for him, not because they had to, because they chose to. The heat pulsed again and she gasped, doubling over slightly. Kieran started forward instinctively, then caught himself and stopped. She could see the war in his expression. Every alpha instinct demanding he go to her, comfort her, ease her pain. And his will holding him back, because she'd asked him to. Let me at least help you to the bed, he said. You're about to collapse. She wanted to refuse. Wanted to maintain the distance between them. But her legs were shaking so badly now she wasn't sure she could make it on her own. All right, she whispered. He crossed the space between them in 3 strides and slipped an arm around her waist, careful not to touch any more of her than necessary. Even that small contact made her shiver, made the ache inside her intensify. She leaned into his strength despite herself, feeling the solid warmth of him, breathing in his scent. Pine and wood smoke and winter. And underneath it all, Alpha. Her omega nature recognized it, called to it, wanted to wrap herself in it until the rest of the world disappeared. He got her to the bed and helped her sit, then stepped back immediately. She looked up at him and saw the tension in every line of his body. His hands were fisted at his sides. His jaw clenched tight. He was barely holding on. It's affecting you too, she said. Of course it is. He moved back to the chair by the fire. But I'm not a rutting animal. I can control myself. She pulled the furs up around herself and tried to focus on anything other than the need building inside her. Have you ever been with an omega during heat? No, he stared into the flames. I was supposed to be bonded 5 years ago, before the fever took my family. We were compatible. She was kind. We might have been happy. His voice went quiet. But she died with the rest of them, and I couldn't imagine choosing anyone else after that. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate. That must have been lonely. He looked at her. It's been lonely, watching my pack members find their mates, start families, while I stay alone. But I couldn't settle. Couldn't bond with someone just to have a bond. He paused. It has to mean something. Has to be real. The conviction in his voice made something ache in her chest that had nothing to do with heat. She wondered what it would be like to be chosen by someone like him, to be seen and wanted for who she was, not what she represented, to be protected not because she was weak, but because she was precious. Tell me something, she said, needing to break the silence before she did something foolish. Tell me about your pack, about the people you protect. He seemed grateful for the change of subject. For the next hour he talked, his voice low and steady, telling her stories of his territory. The farmer who grew the best wheat in 3 provinces. The widow who could predict weather better than any almanac. The children who played in the river during summer and left offerings for the forest spirits in winter. She listened and let his words wash over her, using them to anchor herself. The heat came in waves, each one stronger than the last, but his presence somehow made it bearable. Not easier, exactly, but less frightening. As dawn light began to creep through the shutters, she finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why haven't you sent me away?" Her voice was hoarse from fighting back whimpers. "You could have. Should have. I'm dangerous to keep here." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with exhaustion. "Do you remember what I said yesterday? That I thought you were supposed to be here?" "Yes, I meant it." He turned to look at her fully. "From the moment I heard your heartbeat through that storm, something in me knew. I don't understand it, can't explain it, but you're supposed to be here, with me." He paused. "And I'm not going to let fear or politics or biology take you away before I understand why." The honesty in his words stole her breath. She stared at him across the small cabin and saw the truth written in every line of his face. He meant it. Every word. "I don't even know your last name," she said. "You don't know mine. We're strangers." "We were strangers," he held her gaze. "I don't think we are anymore." The heat crested again, and this time she couldn't hold back the small sound of distress that escaped her throat. Kieran's control cracked visibly. He half rose from his chair, every muscle taut, before he forced himself back down. "Just breathe," he said, his voice strained. "Focus on breathing. It will pass." "How do you know?" "Because you're strong." The certainty in his tone cut through her pain. "Strong enough to survive 3 days running. Strong enough to keep your secrets even when you're dying of fever. You can survive this too." She closed her eyes and tried to believe him, tried to hold on to his words instead of the need tearing through her body. Outside, the wind had finally died. The storm was passing. Soon she'd have to make a choice about what came next. But for now, in this moment, she let herself have this one strange gift. An alpha who kept his promises, who offered protection without demanding payment, who looked at her and saw someone worth saving, even if it was only for 2 more days, even if she could never let herself have more than that. The arrow punched through the shutter with a crack that split the dawn silence. Maris jolted upright in bed, the haze of heat sickness clearing in an instant as wood splintered across the floor. Kieran was already moving, crossing the cabin in 3 strides to grab his sword from where it leaned against the wall. "Stay down," he ordered, his voice hard with command. She rolled off the bed and crouched behind it as another arrow hissed through the broken shutter. This one embedded in the far wall with a solid thunk. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The heat still pulsed through her body, but fear overrode it, sharpening her senses. "How many?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Kieran moved to the side of the window and peered through a gap in the shutters. His jaw tightened. 4 that I can see, maybe more in the trees. 4 trained killers against 1 alpha and a half-delirious omega. The odds were not in their favor. "There's a root cellar," Kieran said without looking at her. "Hidden door behind the woodpile. Get down there and don't come out until—" "No." She pushed herself to standing, using the bed frame for support. "I won't hide while you die protecting me." He turned to stare at her. "You can barely stand. I can fight." She moved toward the hearth where a iron poker leaned. Her hands shook as she gripped it, but she forced them steady. "I've done it before." The front door shuddered under a heavy impact. Someone testing it, finding it barred from inside. Kieran's eyes held hers for one long moment. She saw him weighing options, calculating odds. Saw the moment he accepted that she wouldn't hide. "Stay behind me," he said. "And if I tell you to run, you run. Understood?" Before she could answer, The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. 2 men burst through, weapons drawn. Maris recognized the dark cloaks, the professional efficiency of their movements. The same ones who'd killed her grandmother. Kieran met the first one head-on, his sword deflecting a blade that would have taken his throat. Metal rang against metal in the small space. The second assassin circled left, trying to flank. Maris swung the poker with everything she had. It connected with the man's knee and he went down with a grunt. She brought it up again, catching him across the jaw before he could rise. He collapsed and didn't move. The rush of adrenaline singing through her veins felt almost like clarity, almost like strength. Kieran drove his opponent back through the doorway. She heard shouts outside, saw movement in the trees beyond. More coming. They'd never hold them off. A third assassin appeared in the doorway. This one was bigger, scarred, moving with the confidence of someone who'd killed many times before. His eyes found Maris, and something like recognition flickered across his face. "The princess," he said. "Finally." The word hit her like a physical blow. She saw Kieran's shoulders stiffen, saw the fractional pause in his stance as the truth registered. The assassin lunged for her. She tried to dodge, but her legs betrayed her, weakness from the heat, making her movements slow. His hand closed on her arm and yanked her forward. She smelled leather and steel and old blood. Then Kieran was there, moving faster than she'd thought possible. He drove his shoulder into the assassin's chest, and they both crashed into the table. Wood splintered. The man's grip on her arm broke. Kieran's fist connected with the assassin's face once, twice, 3 times. Blood sprayed. The man went limp. "Get outside," Kieran said, breathing hard. "The cabin's a trap. We need room to move." She wanted to argue but knew he was right. The small space gave them no advantage. She gripped the poker tighter and followed him through the broken doorway into the gray dawn light. Snow stretched in all directions, pristine and deadly. 4 more figures emerged from the tree line, moving toward them with weapons drawn. Behind them she saw horses. Supplies. They'd been camped nearby, waiting for the storm to break. Waiting for her. Kieran positioned himself between her and the approaching assassins. She saw the tension in his back, the way his sword hand flexed. Preparing for violence. "Last chance," one of the assassins called out. "Give us the girl, and you live. Fight, and you die with her. Come and take her." Kieran said softly. They came. Maris had seen fights before, had witnessed her grandmother defend their home twice in 3 years. But she'd never seen anything like this. Kieran moved like water and lightning combined. His sword traced arcs through the morning air, each strike precise and devastating. The first assassin fell before he'd taken 3 steps. The second managed to engage for perhaps 10 seconds before Kieran's blade found his throat. But there were too many. While Kieran fought 2 at once, a third circled toward Maris. She raised the poker and felt her hands shake. The heat pulsed through her again, sapping what little strength she'd gathered. The assassin smiled, seeing her weakness. He lunged. She swung and missed as her legs buckled. The poker fell from her numb fingers. She hit the snow on her hands and knees, gasping. The assassin loomed over her, knife raised. Something inside her broke open. Not fear. Not surrender. Something older and deeper. A part of herself she'd kept locked away for 3 years, while she pretended to be no one. Royal blood. Ancient lineage. Power that had slept while she ran and hid and let herself be small. She looked up at the man who would kill her, and felt that power rise. "No," she said. The word came out as command, layered with authority she'd never let herself claim. The assassin hesitated, just for a heartbeat. Just long enough. Kieran's blade took him from behind, punching through his back and emerging from his chest in a spray of crimson. The man's eyes went wide, then empty. Kieran pulled the sword free and the body fell. He turned to Maris, breathing hard, blood spattered across his face and chest. For a moment they just stared at each other. "Princess," he said quietly, "I was going to tell you." Her voice shook. "I was trying to find the right time." Later. He reached down and pulled her to her feet. "We need to move. There might be more." But the clearing had gone silent. 5 bodies lay in the snow, blood staining the white. No movement from the trees. No sound but their own ragged breathing. Kieran checked each body methodically, making sure they were dead. When he finished, he came back to her, and his eyes were different now. Not cold, exactly, but calculating in a way they hadn't been before. "How much trouble am I in?" he asked. "For harboring a runaway princess?" She wrapped her arms around herself. The heat was fading, exhaustion rushing in to take its place. "I don't know. It depends on who's giving the orders for my death." "And who is?" "I don't know that either." She looked at the bodies in the snow. "My family's been dead for 3 years. Someone wants to make sure the line dies with them." Kieran was quiet for a long moment. She saw him thinking, weighing what this meant. She waited for him to tell her to leave, to say she'd brought too much danger to his door. Instead, he sheathed his sword and moved to her. He lifted one hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek. His fingers were warm despite the cold. "I made you a promise," he said. "I told you I wouldn't let anyone take you. That was before you knew what I was. You're still you." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "Royal blood doesn't change what I heard in that storm. Doesn't change the woman who's been sitting across from me for 2 days, trying so hard to be brave." Tears pricked her eyes. "I'm a threat to your pack, to your whole territory. Then we deal with it." His hand fell away, but his gaze held steady. "Together." The word wrapped around her like a vow. She stared at him and saw no deception, just determination and something that looked almost like wonder. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you risk everything for me?" He smiled then, small and fierce. "I think you know why." The heat pulsed again, weaker now but still present. His scent surrounded her, calling to parts of herself she'd tried to deny. She swayed toward him before she caught herself. "We should go inside," she said, "before I do something foolish." "Would it be foolish?" His voice had gone rough. "If you chose me, knowing what you are? Knowing what I am?" Her heart hammered. "I don't know. I've never chosen anything before. I've only ever run." "Then let me make it easy." He stepped back, giving her space. "I'm going to protect you. Whether you accept my claim or not, whether you stay or leave when this is over, that's not negotiable." He paused, and something vulnerable flickered across his face. "But if you want more than protection, if you want a partner, an equal, someone who sees you as you are and chooses you anyway," he held her gaze. "I'm here, for as long as you'll have me." The offer hung between them, enormous and terrifying. A future she'd never let herself imagine. Safety. Belonging. Someone to stand with instead of running alone. She opened her mouth to answer, and felt the world tilt sideways. The heat roared back with vicious strength, punishment for the adrenaline spike that had let her fight. Her knees buckled. Kieran caught her before she fell, lifting her against his chest. "I've got you." "The bodies," she managed. "Someone might find them." "I'll handle it." He carried her back toward the cabin. "Right now you need rest. There's something else." She gripped his shirt, fighting to stay conscious. "Something I have to tell you before this goes any further." "Tell me inside." He got her through the broken door and laid her on the bed. She tried to sit up, but he pressed her gently back down. "The political situation," she said urgently. "There's a treaty. Your pack, your territory. If you claim me, you're declaring against whoever orchestrated my family's deaths." "I know. You could lose everything." "I know that too." He brushed hair back from her face. "Let me worry about politics. You focus on getting through the next day." "Kieran." "Sleep, Maris." He said her name for the first time, and it sounded like music. "We'll figure out the rest when you're stronger," she wanted to argue, wanted to make him understand what he was offering to sacrifice. But the heat was dragging her down, and his hand was warm on her forehead, and she was so tired of carrying the weight alone. "Stay," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." His voice followed her down into darkness. And for the first time since she'd watched her grandmother die, Maris let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd found someone worth trusting with the truth. All of it. Maris woke to afternoon light slanting through the shutters and the sound of voices outside. Not close. Far enough that she had time to assess and move, but urgent enough that her pulse jumped before she was fully conscious. The heat had finally broken sometime during the night. Her body felt wrung out, exhausted, but her mind was clear for the first time in days. She pushed herself upright and found fresh clothes laid across the foot of the bed. Her cloak, her boots cleaned and dried, Kieran's work. She dressed quickly, fingers fumbling with laces. Through the broken shutter she could see movement near the tree line. Kieran stood in the clearing talking to 3 men she didn't recognize. Pack members, she guessed from their posture. The way they deferred to him while standing close enough to argue. One of them gestured toward the cabin. Kieran shook his head firmly. The man argued back, his voice rising enough that she caught fragments through the walls. "Can't harbor, treaty obligations, council will demand." She couldn't hear Kieran's response, but she saw his spine straighten, saw him say something that made all 3 men step back slightly. Alpha command, delivered without raising his voice. The conversation continued for another few minutes before the men retreated into the forest. Kieran watched them go, his shoulders tight with tension, then turned back toward the cabin. Maris moved away from the window before he could see her watching. Her heart hammered as she heard his footsteps on the porch, the soft scrape of the door he'd managed to prop back in place despite the broken hinges. He stepped inside and stopped when he saw her dressed and standing. For a moment, they just looked at each other. "You heard," he said. "Enough." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Your pack knows I'm here." "Someone saw the smoke from the chimney, came to check on me after the storm broke." He moved to the hearth and began building up the fire. "Found the bodies before I could move them. Word spread fast. And now they want you to turn me over." "It wasn't a question. They want me to follow protocol." He didn't look at her. "Take you to the council. Let them decide what to do with a runaway princess, whose bloodline threatens half the treaty agreements in the Northern Territories." Cold fear settled in her stomach. "Will you?" He turned then, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "No. Kieran, you have to think about your people, about what this could cost them." "I am thinking about them," he crossed to where she stood. "And I'm thinking about you. About what happens if I hand you over to people who might decide you're more useful dead than alive. You don't know that they'd kill me, don't I? He held her gaze. Someone's been trying to eliminate your entire bloodline for 3 years. You think the council chambers are free of whoever's giving those orders? She wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. He was right. She'd spent 3 years running precisely because nowhere felt safe. No authority could be trusted. So what do we do? She asked quietly. We go to the capital. His voice was steady. Together, I claim you publicly before the High Council. Put you under my protection as alpha of this territory. Her pulse jumped. That's a declaration of intent to bond. Yes. You'd be tying yourself to me, to my claim, to whatever political nightmare that brings down. Yes. He stepped closer. Unless you don't want that. Unless you'd rather I find another way to keep you safe without binding you to me. She searched his face, looking for doubt or hesitation. Found only certainty and something deeper, something that made her chest ache. Why would you do this? Her voice came out barely a whisper. You could find an uncomplicated mate, someone who doesn't come with assassins and political intrigue. I don't want uncomplicated. His hand rose slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he touched her cheek, the gesture achingly gentle. I want you. Exactly as you are. Complications and all. You barely know me. I know enough. His thumb traced along her jaw. I know you're brave enough to keep running when anyone else would have given up. I know you're strong enough to survive 3 days of hell and still try to protect me from the consequences of helping you. I know that when you look at me, I don't feel alone anymore. Tears pricked her eyes. I've never trusted anyone like this. I know that too. His voice softened. Which is why I need you to tell me what you want. Not what you think you should choose. Not what's safest or smartest. What you want. The question hung between them, enormous and terrifying. What did she want? Safety. Belonging. Someone to stand beside instead of always running alone. But more than that. She wanted this. Him. The way he looked at her like she mattered. The careful respect he'd shown, even when instinct must have screamed at him, to claim her during her heat. The steadiness in his voice when he promised to protect her. She wanted to stop running. I want to go to the capital with you. The words came out stronger than she expected. I want to face the council. And I want... She took a breath. I want to accept your claim, if you're sure, if you understand what you're offering. Something blazed in his eyes. Relief and joy and fierce possessiveness all tangled together. I'm sure. Then yes. Her voice shook. Yes to all of it. He pulled her into his arms, careful despite the emotion she could feel vibrating through him. She let herself lean into his strength, breathing in his scent. Pine and wood smoke and winter. Home. We'll leave at first light, he said against her hair. It's 3 days. Ride to the capital if we push hard. I'll send word ahead that I'm coming with a claim to register. That should give us some protection. Or paint a target on both our backs. Either way, it brings everything into the open. He pulled back enough to look at her. No more running, no more hiding. We face this together. Together. The words settled in her chest like a promise. They spent the remaining hours of daylight preparing. Kieran disappeared for a while and returned with supplies and 2 horses. She didn't ask where they came from. Didn't ask what he'd told his pack members. As evening fell, he made them a simple meal and they ate in silence. She caught him watching her several times, his expression unreadable. What are you thinking? She finally asked. That I should have asked your real name? He set down his fork. If I'm going to stand before the High Council and declare my intention to bond with you, I should probably know what to call you. She'd kept the secret so long that speaking it felt dangerous. But sitting across from him in the firelight, she found she wanted him to know. Wanted him to see all of her. Maris is what my grandmother called me. She met his eyes. My full name is Melisande Elena Theron, third daughter of King Aldrich and Queen Celia, last surviving heir to the Winter Throne. He was quiet for a long moment. It's a good name. It's a dangerous name. Maybe. He leaned back in his chair. But it's yours, and anyone who wants to use it against you will have to go through me first. The casual certainty in his voice made something warm unfurl in her chest. She'd spent 3 years believing she had to face the world alone, that trusting anyone would only end in betrayal and death. But looking at Kieran now, she let herself believe that maybe she'd been wrong, that maybe strength came from standing together instead of always standing apart. Tell me what happens after we reach the capital, she said. What the claiming ritual involves. He explained the old traditions. The formal declaration before witnesses, the exchange of vows. The mark he would give her, proof of his protection and her acceptance. It sounded both simpler and more complicated than she'd imagined. And if the council refuses to recognize the claim? She asked. Then we leave. His jaw set. Take you somewhere safe and figure out our next move. I'm not letting you get trapped in that city, if it becomes dangerous. She heard what he wasn't saying. That he'd give up his territory, his pack, everything he'd built, if it meant keeping her alive. The magnitude of his offer made her throat tight. I hope it doesn't come to that, she said quietly. So do I. He rose and began banking the mid-fire. But whatever happens, we'll face it together. That's what a bond means. Partnership. Equal stakes. She stood and crossed to where he worked, touched his shoulder until he turned to face her. In the dying firelight, his eyes were dark and steady. Thank you, she said, for choosing me, for seeing me as more than a problem to be solved. He cupped her face in both hands, his touch gentle. Thank you for trusting me, for letting me stand with you instead of running alone. She rose on her toes and kissed him, soft at first, tentative, then deeper as his arms came around her and pulled her close. It felt like sealing a promise, like choosing a future she'd never let herself imagine. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. Tomorrow changes everything, he said. I know. Are you afraid? She thought about it. About the council waiting in the capital. About whoever wanted her bloodline erased. About all the ways this could go wrong. Yes, she admitted. But I'm not alone anymore. That makes it bearable. He smiled, fierce and tender all at once. No, you're not alone. Not ever again. They stood there in the quiet cabin, holding each other as the fire burned down to embers. Tomorrow they would ride toward uncertainty and danger, toward the political nightmare her existence represented. But tonight, for these last few hours, they could have this. Peace and warmth and the beginning of something that felt like hope. Maris closed her eyes and let herself rest in his embrace. Let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found where she belonged. Dawn would come soon enough. The capital and the council and all the threats that waited there. But for now, wrapped in Kieran's arms with his heartbeat steady against her ear, she felt safer than she had in 3 long years. The last runaway princess had found her alpha, and together, they would face whatever came next.